Thank you very much, Andy. We have just gotten this piece of information from Delta Airlines. They are telling us that there will be absolutely no Delta flights until at least 6 o'clock this evening. No Delta flights until at least 6 o'clock this evening. And of course, we're waiting to hear more from the FAA a little bit later. They'll be having a news conference, and we'll bring information to you regarding that news conference. Here in New York City, if you have been out on the streets, you know that things are eerily quiet today all around Manhattan. Many stores are closed. The mood is very somber out there. Art McFarland has more on how people are dealing with this out on the streets. Art?
Well, we are at the northern end of Times Square, and the so-called crossroads of the world is just never this quiet on a weekday, especially on a Wednesday, on which Broadway shows would have their matinees. Of course, as we reported, there will be no shows today, and the streets are relatively deserted here at Times Square compared again to what they would be. Most of the people on the streets are tourists, some of whom were here to their surprise through the greatest catastrophe in the history of the U.S. We have heard over and over, especially from New Yorkers, that the world is different today. The streets are as though this were a legal holiday. People strolling along, most in casual clothes, seemingly with no time schedule in mind. But New Yorkers are a long way from the usual holiday feeling.
Of course, there are a lot of people who are very sad and lost their loved ones and everything. So we are all very kind of feel of sense of loss.
Some businesses are closed, some indefinitely. And as if we know all we need to know about the horror of yesterday, a number of corner newsstands are closed.
There's no New York Times available anywhere, which is very different from, any other day in New York City.
Here in Times Square, the Morgan Stanley stock ticker implores volunteers to give blood. The discount theater ticket booths are closed on this matinee day as some tourists try to digest being here at this time.
Been around the world quite a few times. I spent 28 years in the military, and I never saw anything quite like it.
The Parks Department crew removing a banner that seems too festive for this day after lowering flags to half-staff and the symbol of mourning.
It's home when you start doing it. It's, you don't really conceive, and even like when it happened, you didn't really think it happened. But now that you're lowering the flags, now it's hitting.
And everywhere, people as if in a daze, not really knowing how to feel today.
It's not knowing what's going to happen. Anything that was expected is no longer expected. This is only the beginning of something. It's not over by any means.
And here you have an aerial view of Times Square again. Not even on a weekend or Sunday morning does it seem this deserted. Certainly not on a weekday. People still walking around, trying to digest what happened, as we said. Fortunately, some of those tourists who were scheduled to leave today, that we spoke with, were able to keep their hotel rooms overnight, the hotels being courteous to them. We found at least one restaurant here at Times Square, not open to the public, but open to serve free food to police and rescuers and others who've been involved in the effort to recover from this catastrophe. And of course, everyone's attention is on events as they unfold following yesterday's events. And we're live at Times Square. Art McFarland, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
Okay, thank you very much, Art. We want to take a look now at some of the fallout from this attack. Gas prices jumped across the country in the hours following the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. In Oklahoma City, there are reports that gas was reportedly selling for $6 a gallon. Take a look at this. This is last night in Milwaukee. A line of cars outside a roadside gas station. A lot of people worried about possible dwindling gas supplies, and there was some panic. Lines long, but prices, at least in Milwaukee, did not go up too much. Across the state, though, in Madison, gas prices spiked nearly 50 cents a gallon as consumers lined up at the pumps. Of course, Mayor Giuliani late yesterday telling New York City that gouging was not going to be allowed, not going to be accepted, would be dealt with very severely.
As well it should be. We have light word and his good news. Let's go to Sarah Wallace live. We have some new survivors. Sarah?
Yeah, hi, Steve. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. There are some late developments. A source close to the scene of Ground Zero, is telling us that in the last couple of hours, they have pulled out 3 people alive. Civilian people, 2 of them men, 1 a woman. So that is very good news. Earlier today, we got word that 6 firefighters had been pulled out alive, all of them together in an air pocket, if you will. Also that 2 Port Authority police officers have also been pulled out alive. All of that very good news from the scene. That effort still very much a rescue effort. The mayor telling us earlier that there may be as many as 1,000 people who are still missing beneath each building. I want to refer to the scene actually here and show you there's a growing haze in the sky. That is actually burning rubble from World Trade Center number 7, the 3rd building to collapse yesterday, as well as the dust from all of the debris that they're pulling out. So far, 120 dump trucks have come by here carrying debris, a lot of it just shells of cars. I think one significant picture that I noted was a fire truck absolutely covered in ash, but an American flag still flying. And a short time ago, I spoke with a firefighter who has been inside that rubble since yesterday afternoon. He's taking a short break and he's going right back in because, as he said, a lot of his brothers are still inside. Live from Lower Manhattan, Sarah Wallace, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
Sarah, stay with us. This is incredibly good news. 3 people just pulled out, 2 men, 1 woman, as you just said. Do you know, Sarah, what the extent of their injuries is?
Not clear exactly, but I am told that 2 of the men are in critical condition. The woman not clear, although I understand that she was just completely covered with soot, debris. And of course, she's being taken to a local hospital. All of them taken to a local hospital. What they're doing is they're actually making us stay on one side. Part of this road, as well as the West Side Highway, is being used solely for emergency vehicles so they can come in and out. And then also they're just carrying out all of the debris. And one of the problems that Mayor Giuliani referred to earlier is that the debris is just so dense that they really only believe that they've gotten to the debris that is lining the street. A lot of cars, we've seen a lot of cars being pulled out. They don't believe that they've actually been able to get even inside to where these buildings have pancaked and to where it's believed that most of the victims are trapped.
And Sarah, do you have any indication on where exactly they found these 3 people or how they found them?
No, I'm not clear on that. The firefighters I know were beneath maybe 30 to 40 feet deep beneath that rubble, and it's not clear whether or not they were able to get out on a cell phone or whether they were able to call on their radios. You know, actually, though, there was a report earlier that cell phones have proved to be very, very helpful. One person was able to contact a relative who was then able to get to people and say, you know, the police officers and the firefighters and say, yes, that person is still inside. I've heard from that person. So there's hope that maybe cell phones might be working. The radios of the firefighters, of course, they carry them as well as the police officers.
Thank you very much, sir. We're going to come back to you certainly throughout the morning and the afternoon with this. That brings to total now 12. That would be 2 Port Authority police officers, 6 firefighters, and now 3 civilians. Again, as she said, 2 men and 1 woman. And we have heard countless stories of how cell phones have been the aid to finding these people, including the fire department personnel. They had their gear, their walkie-talkies, but it was through cell phones that they found them.
It shows the importance of this rescue operation, and the good news is that the weather is holding out. So we have Bill Evans here, and we want to check with Bill because this rescue operation is ongoing. They've got the sun shining right now, which is good. What's ahead, though?
You know, a little stronger wind might help them out, push some of that dust out of the way, but there just hasn't been the wind today. It has been great weather, lots of sunshine, and you can see outside the wind really is mostly out of the northeast during the day. It's pushed a lot of that soot and what is, you know, still the smoldering fire there has carried still that south and east of the area. Well, we still have more of that in the forecast for today. Here's some temperatures around the area at noontime. It is 75 degrees at JFK, 74 out Long Island, 75 down the Jersey Shore. It is 71 right around White Plains. What we have is still temperatures that are quite mild today. It is a good day. It is very nice outside, and we'll have a nice afternoon weather-wise. Now, Hurricane Aaron is still working its way well out into the Atlantic. It is still causing some waves in New York Harbor and along the Jersey Shore, but that is subsiding now. The storm has 85-mile-per-hour winds, and it's continuing to work its way out into the Atlantic. The pollen count is still very high, so if you've noticed that walking around New York and the tri-state area, that is still going to be a problem through today and tomorrow. One thing I wanted to show you, though, is a cold front is coming from the Great Lakes. Now, that is going to bring rain to the area coming up tomorrow night. You can see it's still way off there in the northern part of the Great Lakes, just now getting to the lower peninsula of Michigan. But for the afternoon, can't even scare up a cloud out there. It will be very nice across the area. Now, this high-pressure ridge will hang in here till tomorrow, and even the front that's coming does not have a lot of precipitation with it. It'll be very mild. Temperatures will be mild today. Cooler air will get here for the weekend, and we should have some nice weather. 78 with sunshine today. We'll have 80 with sunshine tomorrow. The rain doesn't move in till tomorrow night. So that means for, recovery and rescue for tomorrow evening, there's some scattered showers around, but that's not really anything like heavy torrential downpours of rain. No really severe weather is expected. Once that goes through, then Friday, really through the weekend, right on into the good part of next week, is great weather.
I was noticing, actually, behind Sarah, when she was telling us about the rescue of those 3 people.
With the troops as well. We've not heard one person mention looting, and that is a wonderful thing to hear that. Here, as you can see, these are some of the police cars that Sarah Wallace talked about. We saw, actually, this morning, a fire truck. It was a hook and ladder taken out, and it did not even resemble a fire truck at the time, and all of course, certainly the debris that we first saw sprayed on people, and the firemen here working so hard.
And look at these firefighters. They have got to be exhausted. Imagine, Steve, that they have been there, many of these gentlemen, all night long. They have been working round the clock since 9 o'clock yesterday morning. They have lost so many of their brethren, and they are out there and very, very sad, yet working so very hard in this rescue operation.
Diana, they're the ones that charged up those stairs. They're the ones that were there helping so many people. We have some breaking news that we want to get to you now. It's from ABC News. We're just reading as we give it to you. Most, if not all, the hijackers were Egyptian or Saudi nationals. The Bin Laden organization includes individuals from many countries, but most of the sensitive positions are occupied by Egyptians and Saudis. We have identified 2 of the men, Satan Sukwami, a Saudi national, on AA-11 passport recovered in the rubble, and Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian national. He is a trained pilot. Unclear which flight he was on. We did also find out this morning, Diana, the car that they seized from Boston Logan Airport, where a man had gotten into an altercation and reported to the FBI. That included Saudi, or Arabic, I should say, language flight manuals. So that is right. News.
Right, and we're looking here at this. Literally, this information has just come into us, and we knew, have at least been speculating, and knew really that some of these men who hijacked these planes had to have been trained pilots. They had to have been, and so here we have some confirmation that one of these gentlemen was a trained pilot. One
of the pilots that I talked to yesterday said, if you are not a trained pilot, if you are a trained pilot, it is difficult to have put a plane in a small target. In flight terms, the World Trade Center is a small target, so they had to be very, very fine pilots.
Yes. What you're looking at right now are pictures from yesterday. The sheer enormity of this tragedy is going to unfold in the coming days and weeks, of course, as we learn about the lives of those who were victims of this. One hero who we know gave his life yesterday trying to save his fellow New Yorkers is Fire Chief Raymond Downey. Rescue is what Downey did, and that was the business that he was the best at. And just 3 months ago, Bill Buttell spent the day with this man who was the search and rescue leader during the Oklahoma City bombing.
If we had cut that or tried to remove it, potentially we could have brought down the rest of the building. So we left it.
Even now, more than 6 years after the fact, New York City Fire Chief Raymond Downey fights with his emotions. As head of New York's Urban Search and Rescue Task Force, he commanded a team of 700 rescuers, 56 of them from New York, 56 with experience at the World Trade Center, 56 whose lives would never be the same.
I was on that pile for 16 days, and I can have vivid memories of many of the victims that we brought out.
Downey and his team left Kennedy Airport just hours after word first came of the tragedy, joining rescue teams from fire departments all across the country. Scheduled for 12-hour shifts at one point, they would work for almost 30 straight hours to locate mothers and sons, fathers and daughters. All the people they prayed were alive, but deep down they knew otherwise.
During the whole operation, there was a lot of concern for getting into the daycare center and recovering some of the children that were in there. When we did finally reach it and get it, there was a relief that we had reached that area, we had found the area, and that we were able to bring those little ones to their loved ones.
Chief Downey spent 16 days at the explosion in Oklahoma City, and even now he remembers many of the names and faces of the people affected by the tragedy.
They have the memorial right on the site of where we worked for 16 days. Those who live nearby or visit, they'll see it every day. I don't think that we'll ever, during our lifetime, forget about it.
On Roosevelt Island, Bill Butel, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
And our thoughts and prayers are with the family of Fire Chief Raymond Downey.
And many of the clergy, too, that was out there, that Mayor Giuliani friends with some of the fathers that were out there. Joe Torres is standing by live at the Lincoln Tunnel with the latest out there. Joe, what can you tell us?
Steve, you know, Art mentioned it a little bit earlier that this section of the city, we're in Midtown here, it's a virtual standstill. We're at the entrance of the tunnel, like the other tunnels leading in and out of New York City. It is closed except for emergency vehicles and any other vehicles that actually get the approval of the Port Authority officers here who are on duty checking every single car, vehicle, truck that comes by, taking down license plates, looking at identification. Just a few seconds ago, we saw the Wilkes-Barre Township, all the way in Pennsylvania, officers going through, lending a helping hand. But that's the latest here. We'll have more for you as the day progresses. Live at the Lincoln Tunnel, I'm Joe Torres, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. We're going to wrap it up now and hand it back over to ABC, but of course, we will be here throughout the afternoon.
All right, related in any way to these operations in the foreseeable future in Miami?
No, there's absolutely no indication of anything like that, Peter.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Kaufman.
You,
appreciate it in Florida. Nothing tougher in the world than to talk when you got something screaming in your ear. That's why people take it out when you sometimes see people on television doing that. So that is one more piece of information which we believe we put together into the investigation panels. And we'll ask ABC's John Miller to come back in just a moment. But I want to check with what is going on in Washington at the moment. So is Claire Shipman on station?
Here with it. The FBI has surrounded the Westin Hotel. Remember, reports all morning have shown and have stated that the car belonging to what they believe are some of the suspects in the hijacking yesterday of at least 2 planes out of Boston was found at Logan Airport, and we can only assume that this FBI and police surrounding of the Westin Hotel in Boston is somehow related to that.
Yes, we are told that a tactical team has been seen going in and out of the hotel. A lot of police officers are gathered in the lobby. As you can see, they are outside as well, trying to control the crowd. The officers were actually seen bringing in fiber optic equipment, and WHDH-TV has reported the officers were using this equipment to check under hotel room doors, hotel rooms on the 16th floor. So they have targeted a pretty specific area within the Westin Hotel. Of course, as you know, 2 of the flights hijacked in yesterday's terrorist attack originated out of Boston. And again, you're looking at pictures. These may be taped pictures. As you can see, a number of SWAT team officers moving into the hotel there in Boston in the Back Bay section.
That says Boston police were also told that 24 FBI SWAT team members have moved into this hotel. We're going to stay with this picture for a little bit at least and see what we can see. I understand is this live picture control room? Chad, can you tell me? We don't know. We don't know. This is what's being fed over station WHDH in Boston. Again, the Westin Hotel, the Back Bay section, if you're familiar with Boston, in Copley Square. Dozens of SWAT team members from the FBI and the Boston police have surrounded, and we are told, stormed the hotel. Trying to listen to what that sound is. Might just be rattling.
Jonathan, I guess
CNN has been following this, and we're going to throw it over to CNN right now and let them pick up the coverage on this.
Operation is going on, presumably connected to the hijacking and the terrorist attack.
Folks, we want to just bring you up to date for a moment. If you have just joined us, what you're looking at is not New York City. It is not Washington. It is the heart of Boston, Copley Square, where within the last half hour, SWAT teams arrived at the Westin Hotel in Copley Square. SWAT teams identified as members of the Boston police with an armored car, some of them carrying automatic weapons, wearing helmets and masks. Also, as we've heard Ann Dufresne report, there are at least 4 ambulances on the scene. They're parked on Huntington Avenue outside the front entrance of the Westin Hotel, not in the inner circle where the taxi cabs go and where people pull up to unload passengers and luggage, but actually on the street. There does not seem to be any real rush or any true emergency out front of the hotel because, as you can see, there are dozens of people milling around, watching waiting, just like everybody else, to see what's going on. Nor has there been any indication, any visualization that they are putting up any sort of a police line. Usually at a crime scene, we see yellow tape. But at this location, at this point, we do not. Obviously, we're having a little bit of a problem with our audio feed. I'm sorry, our video.
No,
but
Susan, we're just trying to get some of the passers-by to sit down, and everybody wants to figure out what is going on. Swat has grown very, very...
Perhaps you can hear me. I hope.
Well, clearly there is a major operation going on at the Westin Copley Hotel in the heart of Boston. It is unclear. I think it is fair to say it is unclear exactly what this SWAT team is in that hotel looking for, what they believe is in there. Let me just focus on what we do know for a second. We do know that some number of suspects, that we don't know how many, I don't want to use the word suspect here because police aren't, some people have been taken into custody. It's not even clear to us that they've been arrested. They are in custody, and law enforcement officials are not calling them suspects, at least not yet, simply suggesting that they may have information that is relevant. That is in Boston. There is another group, we don't know how many, of people in custody. Again, this is in South Florida. We don't know how many, and we don't know precisely why law enforcement agents believe they may have information or may in some way be connected to what is going on in Boston. Boston, of course, was the origination point for flights involved in this incident yesterday in the hijackings. There were also reports in Boston some time back that there was some small number of people who may have been involved in a terrorist cell somehow connected to Osama bin Laden. That was a report some months ago. Bill Delaney, our Boston bureau chief, helped me on this a bit. Bill, I believe I have that right, and absolutely correct me if I don't.
And earlier this year it was that the FBI said that in the late 90s, 2 Arab men had suddenly left Boston in 1998. One of them had been a cab driver here for 15 years. The other had been here for a shorter period of time, but both, the FBI said, had ties to Osama bin Laden. Now, interestingly, the man, the taxi driver who had lived here for 15 years, Bassem Khanj, his name was subsequently killed in Lebanon in an attack on the Lebanese army that was believed to be financed and driven by Osama bin Laden. The other man is presently in a Jordanian jail. He was arrested on the eve of the millennium for planning an attack on a hotel in Jordan that largely served American and Israeli tourists. Now, the FBI at the time said they couldn't say for certain whether these men were here actively working as a terrorist cell, if you will, for Osama bin Laden, or whether they were just living here for a period of time to raise money or whatever. And as I said, in 1998, they left, the FBI saying they left suddenly at that time. So there are antecedents for the possibility of some kind of cell here that may have laid some kind of groundwork for this boarding of these airplanes yesterday that led to the hijackings, that led to those horrific crashes into the World Trade Center. Aaron, a lot of information flying around here, but we do know for certain that there was some sort of an Osama bin Laden terrorist cell here just a couple years ago. Okay,
there is indeed a lot of information flying around, and trying to grab it out of the air and make sense of these floating pieces of information is the task of the moment. Back to Kelly Rita in Washington. Kelly's been working the
attack on the United States is an attack on any NATO member. That will give you great military and political cooperation. But what about the states like Kuwait and Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, who were so critical to us during Operation Desert Storm? Do you expect from them outspoken positions of support?
Yes, I do, Tom, and we've been in touch with many of them in the course of the day, and I'll be talking to more of them this evening and tomorrow. I have been very, very satisfied with the degree of support we have received, not only from our NATO allies, but other European countries, from our friends here in the Western Hemisphere at the Organization of American States Summit yesterday. And as I have called around the Persian Gulf region, I am getting expressions of support. I got a letter from Mr. Amri Moussa, who is the chair of the Arab League, expressing condolences, and I also spoke to him on the phone. And they find this an outrage against humanity. It should not be seen as something done by Arabs or Islamics. It was something that was done by terrorists, and we ought to see it that way, and we ought to rally the entire civilized world against this kind of activity.
Are you sending a message to Afghanistan tonight through Pakistan, and if you are, what is that message?
We are sending a variety of messages to any nation that might have knowledge about such terrorist activity. We're not accusing any organization yet, but there is a body of evidence that is slowly growing. And what we're saying to the Pakistanis is that we'd like to have any information that you might have that would shed light on this incident or who might have caused it. And as we go forward, we might want to come to you for assistance if the response turns out to be in an area where you can be of an assistance. With respect to Afghanistan, we have always told the Taliban leadership that they should not be harboring Mr. Osama bin Laden and a network that he controls. And we're reinforcing that message and also making it clear to them that they should disavow themselves of any kind of involvement with such organizations if they want the world to try to help them with the serious problems that they have in their society and in their economy. And we're doing this throughout the region, throughout the world, wherever terrorists find host nations to take care of them, to give them support. The President was very clear last night. We're not only going after the perpetrators, we'll go after those nations, states, and organizations who give them succor, who provide them assistance and give them a place from which they can launch their terrorist attacks.
But, Mr. Secretary, it's one thing to go after a headquarters of a terrorist organization or even its leader, but when you begin to attack the country that may be harboring him, that can change the political equation very quickly, can't it?
Well, it can, and we will be very cautious in how we might use our military strength. And I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but one always has to consider that. But at the same time, these countries tend to put themselves at risk by harboring terrorist activity of this type. That's why it is in their interest to become part of a civilized world and get rid of this sort of activity and not let it perpetuate and exist within their borders.
After the terrorist attacks on the United States embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, there was a swift response at 2 targets. Later, some question about whether or not, in fact, one of the targets was appropriate. Are you going to take more time this time?
Well, let's first of all determine who is responsible and then determine the best response. The response may be political, certainly diplomatic, and it may well be military. And you can be sure that we will do it carefully, we will do it prudently, and we'll make sure we've got the goods on them, or at least a high probability of having the goods on them before launching military strikes, if that turns out to be the proper recommendation coming from the Pentagon to the President, and the President approves it.
Mr. Secretary, you grew up as a military man in a bipolar world. We formed NATO, the greatest military alliance in the history of mankind, to face down the Russians if it ever came to that. Are we going to have to form more permanent alliances now to deal with terrorism, long-term, not short-term?
I think we do have to form more other kinds of alliances. I'm not sure we need a new organization. I mean, you saw what NATO did today. They invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which was never designed for this kind of purpose. When you look at the spirit of the Washington Treaty, where all these nations were going to come to each other's aid in time of danger in the event of an attack, this in the 21st century is the kind of attack that we have to be prepared to defend against, to respond to. And NATO came forward today and understood the nature of this new threat, and I think correctly invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. Any nation attacked, all other nations will be expected to assist in the response and come to the defense and assistance of the nation that's been attacked from outside the alliance.
Secretary of State Colin Powell, thanks very much for being with us tonight, and obviously we wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Let's get the latest now on the investigation from our Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, who joins us from Denver, where he was stranded as he attempted to get back from his Rocky Mountain vacation. Pete?
First, the numbers. There's probably about 8,000 federal agents and support personnel working on this investigation tonight. The Attorney General says now that the FBI has received over 2,000 leads. Now, you might expect that magnitude of activity at this point, but what's unusual about this investigation is how far it's gotten, according to officials. For example, by checking the manifest of people who boarded those 4 planes that were hijacked and comparing them against hotel registration lists in Boston, for example, They've already done some searches in Boston hotels, and they say they've found material that's useful in that investigation, technical data about airplanes and so forth, maybe even things that people use to disguise themselves. Now, another lucky break. A man in Boston in the airport said he'd gotten into an altercation in the parking garage with some characters that he thought looked suspicious. He described the car. The FBI found it, and that led federal agents to a flight school in Florida, where these two men who were registered to that car had studied pilot training for about the past year, describing themselves, they said, as Germans, and staying for a time with one of the people who ran that flight school. That, in turn, led the FBI to search residences that those two people used, their cars, places they went, bars, restaurants that they've been hanging out. So that just gives you some indication of the kind and the magnitude of the FBI investigation. Now, one other thing that the federal agents are doing is looking at email accounts that perhaps the suspected terrorists might have used to communicate with each other. Now, not all the leads have panned out. There was some concern at one point today that some people associated with this terrorist got onto a train. They stopped it in Providence, but they decided there was no connection time.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams, who's been working the phones from Denver, contacting all of his law enforcement sources, and joining us now from Washington is State Department correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, what do you have for us?
Well, Colin Powell is actually, I think, taking a very unusual tack here with NATO, not having the support, as you quickly pointed out, in the Middle East, going to Europe, going to other countries, Russia and China, who have themselves feel threatened by Islamic terrorism, Islamic-sponsored terrorism, and beginning to try to build a new kind of coalition. Now, this investigation that Pete has been reporting on, I think, has been pretty extraordinary in how quickly they have come together with these leads. Against the backdrop, as you know, of what is widely viewed as an intelligence failure. At the CIA tonight, there was an attempt by the CIA director, George Tenet, to try to rally the troops. He did a closed-circuit video message to all of the thousands of workers out there at Langley, trying to tell them that while they missed preventing this attack, they should stand tall, they should be proud, and they should move onward to try to prevent the next attack and solve this one. Tom?
Thank you very much, Andrea. NBC's Andrea Mitchell tonight. And joining us now from the Pentagon is Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Well, we'll come back to that momentarily. We obviously are having some audio difficulties. That was a tape that we did earlier with Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who had a number of things that were important to share with us. But we want to go now to New York's Times Square and Dateline's Stone Phillips, who is there. Stone?
Tom, I'm on Broadway at Times Square, the so-called crossroads of the world. Normally at this hour, this place is packed with people, pulsing with energy, and it's very noisy. Tonight, as you can see, well, this is what it's like. The lights are bright, but crowds just aren't here. Actually, it's pretty quiet with all the Broadway shows shut down because of yesterday's terrible events. The people who are here seem subdued, not a character trait New Yorkers are known for. And it's something we've seen all day long, a palpable difference. Whether it was riding to work on a half-empty train, as I did this morning, or walking these half-empty sidewalks, you see a kind of 1,000-yard stare in people's eyes. It's almost as if they're trying hard not to cry.
Dawn, the day after the worst day in modern American memory. Americans wake up to a world changed forever. And on the first day of this new and uncertain era, a soldier turned statesman talks of a war that must be fought and won.
We're mad. We were assaulted. But our spirit wasn't assaulted, and our fighting spirit was not assaulted, so we want to respond. You don't attack America like this and get away with it.
In the debris field where the iconic Twin Towers once stood, 18 search and rescue teams, hundreds of people, have been working all night long, sometimes digging with their bare hands, hoping to reach survivors.
I think anybody that was up in the building, you know, I don't think there's much hope for them, but hopefully there are people who maybe came in on the PATH train or were in the stores below and they're just kind of stuck. They might still be alive.
Driving those hopes, the incredible story of 6 firefighters rescued on Tuesday from a pocket in the ruins so intact that one of them was said to be surprised the building had collapsed around them. And this morning, reports that at least one other police officer had also been pulled out alive. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani this morning.
We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today.
And the question on everyone's mind, how many died? The mayor says he is preparing for the worst.
The numbers that we're working on are in the thousands. Obviously, we hope that's not the case.
At the city's hospitals, the hope is there would be more survivors to treat.
They told me the story of how they've had physicians down at ground zero at the site. One person was trapped and they thought they'd have to amputate his leg. They were able to get him out without doing that, and he is alive and here thanks to that tremendous dedication.
And that police officer rescued this morning, word now of his heroic effort to save others before he himself became trapped.
He said that as soon as they discovered him, that the EMS personnel at the scene were doing an outstanding job of comforting him. They were giving him water to drink. They were doing, he said, a great job of trying to get him out of the scene, but it was very difficult, very dangerous. He was actually pinned for quite a while until they were able to get him out.
This morning at the Pentagon, the all-night effort merely to extinguish the fires is still underway.
We were never able to fully extinguish the fire in the roof structure. We were able to get it mostly knocked down, and again, because we're having extreme difficulty making access under the slate roof, it's to be expected to take a while to get there. We have had the fuel from the jet catch fire again, and we're now in there with some additional hand lines and some phone lines with aircraft firefighters inside of the insides of the Pentagon, trying to suppress it, this time with firefighting foam.
And even as the struggle to contain the fires continues, the death count begins. Word this morning that the number would exceed 100, mostly from the Army and Navy, and some intelligence personnel. From the White House this morning, another address from the President.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life.
As he did last night, the President seeks to reassure Americans that life would go on, but it is going to be different.
The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens.
Across the nation, it is clear things are far from normal. This morning, air travel still shut down, stock markets closed, sporting events postponed, Broadway shows dark, and U.S. military forces worldwide on high alert. Warships patrolling the waters off Washington and New York, AWACS radar planes patrolling the skies. As rescuers toil, another high-stakes effort is underway to find those responsible for the carnage. NBC's Chris Hansen reports investigators are making swift progress.
Authorities may have identified some of the actual hijackers, and here's how they think they might have done that. Yesterday, they got a phone call from a passenger who had left Logan and arrived at his destination. Of course, he saw on the television monitors what had happened at the World Trade Center. He called investigators to say that he had had an altercation with 2 men he described as being Arabic in the central parking garage near the American Airlines terminal here at Boston Logan. He described the car that they were near, which was turned out to be a rental car, a Mitsubishi sedan. Investigators arrived at the sedan, took a quick look, and they found inside that there were flight training manuals in Arabic. They were able to connect that sedan to 2 men who are now identified as brothers, both of who have passports from the United Arab Emirates, one of whom is a trained pilot. 2 to 3 other suspects may have come across the border into the U.S. from Canada and flown here yesterday morning from Portland, Maine, to take part in the hijackings.
And today in Florida, FBI agents spend hours questioning instructors at a flight school and confiscating potential evidence. Their focus, 2 men described as Middle Eastern who trained at the school last year. By midday, reports that the FBI has connected the 2 with yesterday's terrorist acts. NBC's Kerry Sanders reports the Florida angle is developing quickly.
They enrolled last July into the Venice Flying School, and they really completed their training there in January.
The investigation picks up pace this afternoon, with SWAT teams moving into this hotel in Boston, the city where 2 of the hijacked flights originated. Authorities reportedly looking for material witnesses, people who might have had contact with the growing list of suspects.
They believe they are linked to yesterday's attack. They say that credit cards that these men possess were allegedly used to purchase tickets on flights.
There are local news reports, unconfirmed, of 3 arrests. All we know is 1 person is taken away in a van, and it is unclear this afternoon what, if any, role he had in yesterday's attacks.
And federal investigators are confirming that they do believe that there is an actual terrorist cell here in the Boston area with direct links to Osama bin Laden.
As the search for suspects heats up, distraught family members search for loved ones. Thousands of people still unaccounted for at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, where hope for any survivors now seems to have all but disappeared. In New York, a long line of anxious Americans outside the city's Family Services Center.
It didn't really hit me until just now, you know.
I haven't heard from everybody, and it doesn't even, you know, it's like everybody knows somebody, and we're just all in this together, no matter who we are or what our beliefs are.
And from the families and friends of the passengers on the hijacked planes, heartbreaking stories of heroism and bravery. Tom Burnett, a passenger on the United flight that crashed outside Pittsburgh, called his wife, says Father Frank Calaccio, a friend of the family.
Yeah, he called her on the cell phone and told her that one of the passengers was already dead and that they knew that they were all going to die and that 2 other men and he were going to try to do something, the conversation, and love you, honey, and that was the end of the conversation.
The speculation today that Burnett and his comrades were successful in bringing down the plane short of the hijackers' intended target in this western Pennsylvania field instead of a Washington landmark. On the same plane, Mark Bingham called his aunt and mother.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
He said that?
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I hope it was quick. I hope he took an active part in thwarting the hijackers.
As the day wears on, fresh evidence of the magnitude of this disaster. Pictures released by NASA show the Trade Center fires so large they could be seen from space. And on this day after the towers collapsed, more scenes of absolute devastation. At 2:30, Secretary of State Powell gives a briefing. He makes it clear that not only the United States, but its allies around the world will be seeking the perpetrators. But as of now, no hard answers.
We have to make sure that we go after terrorism and get it by its branch and root.
We're going to interrupt right now
so
the Secretary, Colin Powell, Secretary of State, because we have a news conference unfolding right now in New York City. We have a collection of New York politicians, including Mayor Giuliani, and the 2 senators. The mayor is speaking now. Let's listen.
From FEMA to help direct the federal efforts to assist and to help us, number 1, get through this crisis, and number 2, be a city that's stronger and better for having gone through this very, very difficult time. We're very fortunate to have members of Congress, the Senate, and the House who fight and work so hard for the city and the state. It's a great source of comfort to the people of our city, and as I pointed out to them earlier, we're going to be doing this for a very, very long time. We're going to get over the crisis. We're going to help everyone. We're going to assist them. And we're somehow going to manage our tremendous grief and our loss. But then we're also going to have to rebuild the city and make it even stronger than it was before. And it's going to need everyone's help. It's going to need the help of President Bush, and he has been very, very generous and very attentive to our problems. And it's going to need the help of the Senate, with our senators working for us and focusing on this, the House. It's going to need the help of the governor, who's been extremely involved and helped us in every way. The Speaker, Shelley Silver, who's with us, the Majority Leader. We're going to need their help and their assistance, including the work they're going to do for us tomorrow in the special session. I can't express to the elected officials that are here the sense of strength and support that I feel for the people of the city in having this bipartisan and very talented group of legislators and political leaders helping the people of the city that we all love and are joined together with that common love and common interest. Governor, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor, let me just again thank you for your leadership and the extraordinary efforts of you and your team. We are delighted to have so many of our Washington representatives and Director Albright here with us this afternoon. As I said earlier, within an hour of the incident, I'd spoken to both Senator Schumer and Senator Clinton, and they had said whatever we need from Washington, they would be there to do. We've spoken with the President and Vice President a number of times since then, and we are very grateful for the support of the federal government. And Director Albright, we're delighted that you are here personally this evening to tour the site, to see what we saw earlier this evening, and to help us get through this. One of the things that the mayor and I learned under very tragic circumstances with TWA Flight 800 is that it's not just dealing with the victims, with the immediate crisis, with the health and safety concerns of those at the site. It's dealing with the families. It's dealing with the survivors, those who don't know if their loved one has been lost or not, those who don't know where to go for grief counseling or help. And earlier today, the state turned over the armory on 25th Street to the city, and the city has already moved in place its team so that family members can go there to the armory. The exact address is 68 Lexington Avenue and 25th Street and Lexington Avenue. It is open tonight. It will be open again tomorrow morning and continue to be open so that we will be able to have a central point where those families who have concerns can go, can be with other families, can be with professional grief counselors, and get the support that they need to get them through this tragedy. You know, there's no one in New York and there's no one in America whose heart hasn't been touched by this tragedy. But to those families, to those kids whose mother didn't come home, or those children whose fathers are unknown in their whereabouts, we have to be there for them. And Mayor, again, your team is doing a great job. More than 2,500 family members have gone through that center today. And we will have this up, we will have this running, and Director Albright has indicated that we will have federal grief counselors there as well. As the need arises, the city has it fully staffed and under control now so that we can meet this critical need for the families of the victims. Again, to everyone here, to the congressional delegation, to the senators, to Director Albright, and to the mayor and your tremendous team. You've said it best, Mayor. We're not just going to get through this. We're going to get through this and have a city that's better, a state that's better, and a country that's better as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I want to thank you and the governor for your tremendous leadership. Today's word is really unity. We represent 3 levels of government. We represent both parties. We represent many different ideologies. We stand united in doing everything we can to help New York overcome this crisis and move on to be even a greater city. When I flew today, for the first time, I flew over the city I love after this terrible incident, and not seeing those 2 proud, tall towers standing there, I almost felt violated. But we're not going to let those feelings, stop us from doing everything that we have to do. We want to thank the President. He has been extremely forthcoming. He has said he will do whatever it takes to help New York. He called me within 3 hours of the tragedy to to say just that. Tonight, Joe Albright is here, the head of FEMA. He will spend several days here. They will bring grief counselors. They will bring teams to help with rescue, generators, and other things that we need. And so we will rise and fight again. We will share the grief with the so many, and then we will move forward together, united, because nothing like this kind of terrible, awful, and nasty action can unite us. Nothing can unite us like this, and we're going to stay united till we get the job done.
Well, I want to thank the mayor and the extraordinary team that has come together to organize the response to this attack. And I want to thank the governor for everything that the state is doing and will do. And I particularly want to, on this occasion, thank the federal government as represented here by the director of FEMA. We just had a very thorough briefing. I took a lot of notes about what is needed, the status of the various efforts that are going on. And I would just reiterate that we've responded in an exemplary fashion. I don't think there is any place on earth that could have or would have responded so well. But this is a long-term commitment that we have to make to the people who have been directly affected, the loss of life, the injury, the family members, and to rebuilding and reconstructing, to making it absolutely clear that every business that ever had any operation in the buildings that are no longer there will find a place in New York City, to open up and keep going into the future, to build it together. And none of this would have been possible without the heroic efforts of so many men and women who responded to this tragedy. And you know, we've talked a lot about what we need to do here in New York and how well New Yorkers are responding. But this was an attack on America, and all Americans are responding on behalf of New York as well. And I am confident that America will stand with us every step of the way, provide every resource we need, not only in the immediate time frame, but for months and years to come, because this was an attack on New York, the global city, and it was an attack on American values, and we will show those who plotted this and carried it out that there isn't any stopping us, and that we will keep going, and that's the greatest rebuke that we personally can deliver to them while we seek them out and inflict whatever punishment and retaliation is deserved.
Charlie.
Nobody really knows how strong or weak we are until you hit with a tragedy as we were. And as New Yorkers, we are being asked to go through a test to show the entire world how strong we can be. And with the Congress and the American people supporting us, and with the leadership that's been demonstrated by our mayor and our governor, and we have to do more than just to please our constituents, that we're doing everything that we can. We have to make certain that we remain that symbol of democracy for people throughout the world by sticking together and remembering that in every war we have fallen heroes, and they leave behind a family. So it's not just the dollars that we're talking about. It's the commitment that we have to do all that we can to let the families and the friends know that these were the heroes. They didn't die for Manhattan or New York City. They did it for their country. They did it for the free world. And it's times like this that we have to thank God that we've had the leadership, we've had the will, and we know that we will overcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Squeeze through here. One of us has got to lose some weight.
Sorry. Governor, Mayor,
senators and members of the New York congressional delegation. I am humbled to represent the President of the United States tonight and represent all that is good about our country, bringing the resources that are necessary to New York City. This afternoon, after I flew in with both senators, we toured downtown. I was stunned at the devastation. But more importantly, I was impressed with the resilience of the spirit of New Yorkers I saw on the street. And that is what will get us through these trying times. Our agency, FEMA, will be here as long as necessary, shoulder to shoulder, making sure that everything New York City needs, New York City will get. This is an amazing period in our life. I think it is appropriate that all Americans across the country take a moment, say a silent prayer for those who lost their life. Take a moment, say a silent prayer for those who are putting their lives on the line right now in the recovery effort. We are a strong country. We will get through this. After all, this is America.
The governor mentioned the family center, and I know that many people obviously have a lot of very difficult questions about their loved ones. It's open now. Actually, it has been open, but it'll start functioning for people at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. The phone number is 212-889-6652. That's 212-889-6652. And the center will be manned from 8 in the morning until midnight, and if we have to stay open longer, we will. I have to say that we don't have anywhere near all the information that people are seeking. We so far have recovered 82 bodies. We have participated in rescue efforts for five people. We have that information, but beyond that, we're going to have to keep searching and looking. But if people come to the center and they're seeking loved ones, we can work with them, we can get the information we need, and we can facilitate, hopefully, finding their loved ones.
How many of those 5 were found today?
Well, that's all together. That's in 2 days. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, are you afraid that some of the bodies may have been burned up in the fires that hit the World Trade Center after the plane?
I think we should face these things as we have to deal with them. I don't know the answer to that.
The governor said 2,400 families have already come to the center. Is that correct?
That's correct. Over yesterday and today, we were operating the center at Bellevue and at the Administration for Children's Services, but the numbers became so large that we needed a much bigger space, and the governor and the state have given us the armory to use. We literally, if we're going to service 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people, we need a much bigger space than is available at NYU and at Bellevue.
Mayor, can you talk about what happened this afternoon with 5 World Trade and what the air quality is like down there at this time?
The air quality, as far as we can tell, is Neil here? Neil Cohen, the Commissioner of Health. We're doing constant tests. The air quality is not dangerous. The asbestos in the air, as long as you're not in the epicenter of the recovery, is not at dangerous levels. The reason that everybody is wearing masks, which I know people see it on television, and they think there must be a chemical agent or a biological agent, or the reason they're wearing the mask is if you expose your eyes and you inhale too much of the dust, it's going to irritate you, and that can become very serious. So the rescue workers wear the mask, and they're actually supposed to wear goggles as well.
In terms of the buildings themselves and what happened at 5 World Trade, and
Commissioner,
talk
you
about
want
that?
to discuss?
Help us understand. There's a great deal of confusion as to which other building was impacted by the 5 World Trade Center finally falling. Please, if you could help us understand that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, we expected it to fall. We had been working on it, trying to pick it apart, get as much, of the fire out and the debris removed as we could, and it did collapse. There was some some question whether or not the building one, Richie, was it one? Liberty? Where's Richie? One Liberty Plaza. Because there's some confusion about that address. Had some structural damage. It did not collapse. It was not a secondary collapse. We've sent people there to assess that structural damage.
Is there a gas leak down there? Secondary collapse at the South Tower and also possibility of gas leaks? Can you confirm that?
Well, we've had ruptured gas lines all along. When we get them, we try to put them out wherever we can. We try to shut down every main that we could. We're not able to get access to all of the mains.
There was talk about the Millennium Hotel at 55 Church Street. If you could walk through each of the buildings that actually have sustained structural damage or have...
We'll be able to give you a better report tomorrow. We have structural engineers. It's taking us a while to make all those assessments. We'll have better information tomorrow.
Today, the only two buildings which partially are completely collapsed was the remains of the South Tower, World Trade Center, and World Trade Center Building Number 5. Is that correct?
Right.
Those are the only two ones.
Yes.
Commissioner, can you tell us the status of Battery Park City? We've gotten a number of calls today from people who had lived there. They're not staying there now. They wonder when they can come back, what the status is. Are the buildings stable?
Well, the incident commander has made that judgment as we went along. Some they thought were okay. There might be people in others that might have a problem that they have trouble breathing air that might not bother other people. So we're going back in there. We're going to talk to all the people. We're going to assess the buildings. If we have to move everybody out of the other building, we will. We hope we don't.
Is there any sense that any of those buildings, those apartment buildings, may have suffered some instability because of the crash?
We don't think so, but we are assessing all of the buildings in the area.
What did happen to One Liberty Plaza?
I can only tell you that there was a report of a crack, and we were checking it out.
Did it collapse at all?
No.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us why you invited the mayoral candidates to be here tonight?
So that they would get a briefing on what's going on. They obviously have a great interest in the city, otherwise they wouldn't be doing the very difficult task of running for mayor. They can be very helpful. They have a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts on how we can reach out to people, and we'll continue to be in contact with them. The thing that I emphasized to everyone here, and they also emphasized to me, is we have to work together. We all have different resources and different things that we can bring to this. If we all work together, the city is going to get through this. The people of the city are going to get through it, and the city of New York is going to demonstrate that a free democratic society can absorb this kind of blow and become stronger by it. And we're going to foil the desires of these cowards who attacked us. And we need all the help we can get. And every single one of the people that you see here, the public officials and those seeking public office, care about the city of New York. They love the city of New York, and they can be of help to us. Thank you.
Mayor, I understand that New York made a request for FEMA for 6,000 body bags. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Is the city going to remain under a state of emergency at this point?
Yes.
And how about people south of 14th Street?
Well, but state of emergency is a technical legal term. But I mean, obviously, this is as big an emergency as any city's ever faced. 14th Street South is closed. It'll be closed tomorrow. It was very helpful to have it closed today because we moved out, I think, 3,000 tons of debris today, which if we can do anything like that tomorrow, will give us a real head start in the cleanup. And we needed those streets open because we have to move a lot of heavy equipment and trucks, and we still have the hope that we're going to be able to save people. So sometimes we need that extra time to get the ambulance right to St. Vincent's Hospital or Bellevue or Beekman. So we decided to make the decision to close 14th Street South.
Mr. Mayor,
And so that's a state of emergency.
Are the securities markets going to be open tomorrow?
No, we worked with the stock exchange. They made the determination that they didn't think they were really ready, given communications and other things that they would have to deal with. And
Mr. Mayor, is there any tapping still going on, or cell phone calls, any sort of tangible evidence of somebody who still may be down there, or it would provide some hope that somebody survived?
we've had information like that all throughout the day. Sometimes it's worked out and we've been able to find a person, and sometimes it hasn't. But I don't know of any current information like that.
Can you talk about the additional people how they're holding up? I've seen busloads of rescue crews being brought throughout the city.
Well, that's why it's so valuable to have this support from FEMA, from the president, from the state and the governor. The men and women who are doing this rescue effort are very dedicated and they're terrific, but they're going to need reinforcements. And
last question, Melissa. Mr. Mayor, were any additional people injured in the subsequent collapses today?
At first they thought that 4 people were injured, but so far those reports have not turned out to be correct. People were almost injured. They had to run away, and they just escaped serious injury. But no one, as far as I know, was seriously injured.
But the conditions are still...
The conditions are, look, this is a very dangerous rescue effort. That shouldn't, it's going to continue to be a dangerous rescue effort for some time. The men and women who are doing this, when you see them doing it, they are literally putting their lives at risk to try to find people and save them, or to find their remains. So when you see them operating and working, realize how dedicated they are. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just one more if we could.
Mayor Giuliani concluding a news conference here with the governor of the state of New York, with 2 United States senators from New York, Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Hillary Clinton, with Congressman Charlie Rangel. You have 2 Republicans, you have 3 Democrats, plus a representative of the administration, the Republican administration, Joe Alba, who was the head of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, all showing the unity that has transpired, cutting across political lines to help New York in this time of difficulty. We will now rejoin NBC News and Tom Brokaw with continuing coverage of this attack on America. I'm Chuck Scarborough.
On most evenings until yesterday morning, that was one of the most stunning sights in any urban landscape anywhere in the world. Now, it is, of course, a scene of utter devastation. It is racing against hope that we can find any more survivors in there. There may be as many as 10, 15, 20,000 people who went down with those two towers when they collapsed after they had been hit by the plane. And we're told by people who have been down there, state officials and other reporters, that it's hard to describe how compacted the debris is. When they came down so hard, hundreds of thousands of tons of rubble, and that's all been packed together, so there's very little hope that there can be much airspace in any of that wreckage. As we have been telling you for 2 days now, much of the investigation into the attacks is focusing on Osama bin Laden, a terrorist leader who has been monitored for years, and yet he remains a confounding and deeply enigmatic figure to so many, cold-blooded and calculating. With more on the mind of bin Laden, here's Dateline's Jane Pauley tonight. Jane?
Well, thanks, Tom. The one thing you may think you know for sure about the hideous atrocities wreaked upon this country yesterday is that it had to have been the work of madmen. Who else could conceive of a plot to kill so many innocent people, or to execute that plan by deliberately immolating yourself along with them in the fiery crash? But it could be a big mistake to underestimate the likes of such men as Osama bin Laden.
I don't think he's crazy. He is devious, he is clever, he is relentless, and he is patient.
But he is not a madman.
But he is not a madman.
Judith Miller is a reporter for the New York Times. She's covered the Arab world since 1983, when she was chief of the Times Cairo bureau. Is calling this even fanaticism too simplistic?
Fanatic is actually a very good word to describe them. They are highly motivated, they are highly disciplined, and we underestimate them at our peril.
Understanding them is critical, too. What would motivate a young man, average age of a suicide bomber is 22, to sacrifice his life as an unknown number did yesterday?
I think despair is partly responsible for this wave of suicide bombings.
Because they have nowhere else.
Because they have nowhere else to go. I mean, I have interviewed so many of these young people with so much hope for the future and so few prospects.
Especially the educated ones.
Especially the educated ones.
Dr. Gerald Post is a professor of political psychology at George Washington University. He's also a psychiatrist.
These people are distinctly not psychologically disturbed. In fact, interestingly, psychiatrically disturbed individuals are expelled from the groups because they're considered a security risk.
Many say it's a perversion of Islam, that the Quran condemns suicide. But radical Islamic sects do not call it suicide. In their interpretation, not to act is immoral.
The motivation for these acts is both religious and social. And the social motivation is a fusion of nationalism and radical Islam.
What did America do to unleash this hell upon us?
Well, according to Osama bin Laden, we defiled sacred Saudi and Islamic soil.
When?
In 1990 and 91, when we sent American and international troops to defend his country against Iraqi soldiers.
Just as the Soviets had defiled Islamic soil in Afghanistan in 1979. Financed in part by his money, the Mujahideen then drove the Soviets out. He needed an enemy.
But he needed an enemy, precisely, and he also had an enemy because the Palestinian people were being, quote, oppressed, and it was the duty of all Muslims to come and rescue them, and the Arab countries were being, quote, oppressed by autocratic, horrible rulers whose rule he also wanted to terminate, and he felt that by mobilizing and training Arabs all over the world and Muslims from all over the world, he could accomplish this.
Bin Laden and other radical factions of Islam frighten many in the Arab world too. They may not represent mainstream Muslims, but they are determined and well-financed. But Judith Miller argues that to persist in seeing them as crazy fanatics is dangerous.
We have to get rid of this image of these people as kind of wild-eyed fanatics who are disorganized and can't get their act together.
Why do we have to?
I think if we don't discard these images and stereotypes, we will underestimate the enemy.
What is it about the American psyche that may be undermining our own interests?
I think sometimes any democracy is ill-equipped because we are open. That is our trademark. We are ill-equipped to fight people who are looking constantly for our weaknesses, for our vulnerabilities, for ways in which we can be hurt.
And joining us now from Washington is former Secretary of State Madeine Albright. Madam Secretary, the Clinton administration was so successful in arranging peace for Bosnia and executing an air war against Kosovo, but does it now seem clear to you that you greatly underestimated the threat of terrorism in this country, particularly Osama bin Laden?
I don't think we underestimated it, Tom. I think we understood the difficulty of it. We were clearly under threat. I had a lot of wonderful days as Secretary of State, but my worst day was when those embassies went down in Kenya and Tanzania. We worked to deal with it as best we could, and I think that what it will require is incredible determination now to deal with the issue beyond what we were able to do internationally. And I must say that I'm very supportive of what President Bush and Secretary Powell are doing in getting support for international action.
But should you have begun that international action at that time? There were two retaliatory strikes, one in Sudan, one in the subcontinent. Some question about the appropriateness of the target in the Sudan.
Well, first of all, I think that we did everything that we could. I believe we did the right thing in the target in Sudan, and this is a very different proposition. America itself has been attacked on our own soil, and it is unfortunate that it takes this kind of a horrific act to get people mobilized. I have no question that we did what we could, and we need to support this administration now in doing what it can. And the determination that Judith Miller talks about that the terrorists have, we have to have the same determination. And I have very much been following and read your book and everything that has been talked about in terms of the generation that saved us from the scourge of the evil of World War II. And we now have to exhibit the same bravery that those people did.
Madam Secretary, I do think that it's fair to say that there was not much political will in either party during the Clinton administration to commit the resources that were going to be required, diplomatic, militarily, and economic, to fight terrorism. But let's now try to go forward from here if we can. What are the greatest challenges to the administration in building this international coalition of allies? Are they the moderate Arab states?
Well, I think that clearly there is a question how they will behave. And I think that they are in a difficult position since there are extremists within their ranks and that they are concerned about. But they have to understand that they are just as much threatened by terrorism as the rest of us are. And I think, as Senator Biden said, it is important now for countries to make clear where they stand. We are all threatened by this, and I think we have to be very careful not to just decide that all Arab countries or Islam is responsible for this. This is a group of determined extremists who have their own agenda.
There was such a great deterioration of the situation in Israel before all of this happened. Is there any hope whatsoever for the peace process there?
Well, ultimately, it is the only way that we're going to be able to deal with this. And I am so regretful that we were not able to bring that peace process to a useful conclusion during our time. I think that we cannot live in a world where this kind of terrorism is possible and where we don't continue to have hope and peace. This has been a terrible day where we have really all had to and willingly identify with the victims and their families. And America has to stand tall. We have to remain calm. We have to be determined, and we have to bring allies and friends along. But ultimately, this is our responsibility. America was hit.
Thank you so much, former Secretary of State Madeine Albright. Thanks for joining us tonight, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
And joining us now is NBC's Campbell Brown. She's at the White House. She has more on the options that are being considered there. But Campbell, it's pretty clear tonight that President George Bush the 43rd is using the model of President George Bush the 41st in building a strong international coalition before any military options are executed.
Absolutely, Tom. They're being very careful not to talk about specific retaliatory options, but we are seeing a strategy emerge from these national security meetings the president is having. And what national security sources say is that's really their only option right now in terms of immediate action they can take to focus on trying to build support in the international community for whatever course of action the president chooses. The president today, we heard that in his remarks, as he defined this as really an attack on the world. And White House officials have been quick to point out the constant contact he's been having with world leaders. He spoke twice today with Russian President Putin, speaking with President Zhang. He's been in close contact with British Prime Minister Tony Blair and Canadian Prime Minister Chrétien. But what's interesting, Tom, based on the information we've been given about who the president's in contact with, he has not reached out directly yet to leaders in the Arab world. And we have heard him make some not-so-veiled threats to countries who may be harboring these terrorists, but we're also seeing a recognition from the White House that there is only so much that they can do unilaterally, that there really does have to be support from the rest of the world. Tom?
And Campbell Brown, what about the president's agenda in the short term? He's got some major foreign policy meetings that are coming up both in Washington, an international economic meeting, and then he's going to be on the road come October.
You're right, and there have been a lot of questions raised about how this affects the president's schedule. He has a huge trip to Asia planned for the end of October. Will he still go on that trip? For right now, what the White House is telling us is that his immediate schedule, given the crisis situation, is on hold, that this is really his top priority. And a few domestic trips have been canceled. But as of right now, he is still planning to go to New York for when the UN General Assembly opens. He also wants to make a trip to New York to the site to visit with rescue and recovery workers there. And for now, they are saying that at least nothing is canceled as of yet. They're going to wait and see how this plays out.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. It's an image that will be impossible for any of us to forget for a long, long time, if ever. New Yorkers rushing out of flaming buildings as firefighters and other rescue workers rushed in. Then the Twin Towers collapsed. That's the site tonight. And now New York's bravest are searching for hundreds of their own, as well as the thousands who are believed to have been in the building when those Twin Towers came down. Tonight, Dateline's Dawn Fratangelo has some of their stories.
The date, September 11th, 9/11, will forever be etched in our minds. It's eerie to think that hundreds of people were probably dialing that date, 911, after the first plane slammed into the World Trade Center. And when those 911 calls started pouring in, New York's firefighters and police couldn't stand around in shock like millions of other New Yorkers.
You guys going back?
Yes.
It's our job.
They had a job to do, a job that would cost many of New York's finest and bravest their lives.
Every company across the city has lost somebody. It's hard. It's hard.
As the towers were burning, hundreds of firefighters and police were sent into the buildings. The firefighters were from some of the city's most elite rescue units, teams of 6 who were specially trained in building collapses. While thousands of panicked office workers were running down the stairs, hundreds of firefighters were running up.
I guess it was about the 27th floor. The firemen started coming up into the building. And I just felt that they were very brave, and you know, we were kind of clapping for them and wishing them luck on their way in.
But they were not so lucky. As the rescuers tried to save more people, the towers collapsed. First one, and about 40 minutes later, the other crashed to the ground.
Are you thinking of the firemen because you fear that they were perhaps trapped in the building when it collapsed?
I think they probably were. I think there were a lot of them that did get trapped in there, and I think that's very sad. They were all nice, young, healthy, good-looking guys.
And it wasn't just the rescuers on the inside. As the cloud of debris rained down, it destroyed a command center where 2 of the fire department's top commanders were stationed.
I don't know what to say. We lost people that have given over 40 years.
Our job was never meant to be like this. This is something that nobody would ever figure could happen or would happen.
By late last night, as firefighters continued to battle fires and search the rubble, the numbers were staggering.
We've got over 300 people that are missing that we can't account for. We believe that many of them are gone.
In one fell swoop, entire on-duty companies from fire stations throughout New York were engulfed in the rubble of the collapsed buildings. All just doing their jobs. Now all just gone. The numbers keep adding up. 7 from a rescue squad, 8 from a ladder company, and from here, a captain and a beloved chaplain. For 10 years, Michael Judge, Franciscan father and fire buff, ministered to the men and women of the fire department. Yesterday, he answered the call quickly and died in his line of duty, giving divine comfort.
He had a way about him that just soothed all your feelings and emotions and let you go back to the firehouse thinking that this is okay and everything will be okay. He was a great man.
Support poured in from the neighborhood for the hundreds who simply answered the call. Their fire truck, windows blown out and covered with dust and debris from the blast, now a shrine. The Beatitude reads, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." But without Father Michael, who will comfort them now?
In a time like this, Father Mike would be the one we would all turn to, and they took him from us. It's very, very hard right now.
And in Lower Manhattan, Rescue Squad 18 and Ladder Company 20 together lost 15 members.
This is astronomical. I think right now we're probably all in a state of denial, which is probably how we're getting through it. I don't think this is all going to set it. Right now we're too busy working. Later we'll think about it.
Their colleagues left behind feel they need to do something, anything. So first thing this morning, they boarded a bus heading for Ground Zero to find the fallen.
What do you hope to find?
Number of missions like that going on in America tonight?
There are. We have a number of so-called cap flights up, and as well as some AWACS and some tankers to refuel the interceptors as well as the other aircraft that are involved. They're over a number of areas of the country. In addition, we have on strip alert across the country at a number of the bases aircraft that are prepared to respond in the event it would be appropriate.
Should we assume that that will go on for the foreseeable future?
Well, no. It is clearly stressful on the force, and what we very likely will do, will as we're able to, we will moderate the level of alert as we go through the coming days and as more information is gained and as we are able to develop confidence that the threat situation has been modified. We've already moved from a force protection condition called Delta, the highest level, down to Charlie, which is the next highest, but we're still at a reasonably high state of alert.
We saw the president's plane yesterday with a fighter escort as it returned to the nation's capital. Is it likely that that's going to become routine as the president travels even domestically in this country?
I don't think so. I think that what we see in terrorism is an attack on our way of life. And to the extent we fundamentally alter our way of life and stop living the way we want to live our lives, the terrorist wins. And I think what we need to do is to embark on a broad, sustained effort against terrorism and not allow terrorists to alter our way of life and win.
Mr. Secretary, is it possible that the military will have to have some kind of a component role in what is obviously going to be increased commercial airline security in this country?
That I would think not. The military people are not trained to be air marshals. Those are the kinds of jobs that other people are interested in having and sign up for and do very well at. We have a great many assignments, but basically the men and women in the armed forces are war fighters. And they're not policemen or air marshals. They do best that which they're trained to do. So I would think, to the extent a decision was made that we needed to increase air marshal forces, that there are any number of people in our country who could be trained to do that and do a wonderful job.
We all took notice today when you sent out a very stern warning to the United States military personnel to handle with great care all classified material. Are you worried that some kind of a military plan could be compromised by leaks from the Pentagon?
Tom, I very carefully did not say military. I said the men and women across the defense establishment and across the government. Every person in government who is cleared to handle classified information has to exercise the utmost care. To the extent that intelligence information is revealed, it will ruin our opportunity to track down the terrorists. To the extent that information relating to military operations is revealed, the effect inevitably is that the men and women in the uniform are going to have their lives put at risk, and people will die because of it. It is a violation of federal criminal law to mishandle classified information. And everyone, civilian and military, in this department and across the government, has to be enormously sensitive if we want to not put at risk the men and women in the armed forces.
Finally, Mr. Secretary, do you have any sense at all on when you may have a final count of the victims in the Pentagon attack?
I think it could be several days, Tom. The situation here is difficult. The fire has very recently been put out. They're now using big cranes with balls to break through to try to, all the floors collapsed where the aircraft entered the building between the first and second floor and then drove through 3 or 4 rings of the Pentagon filled with jet fuel that caused an enormous fire, and until those walls are removed and the side building stabilized, it has been too dangerous to get in there. But today they began removing some of the bodies, some of the victims, and it'll just take some time.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Tom.
And what can we expect at the airports across the country tomorrow? NBC's Robert Hager has the latest on that from Washington for us tonight. Robert, what is the FAA saying about resuming commercial and private airline traffic in this country?
Not going to happen tomorrow, at least not in any major way. You know, been waiting for this for quite a while now. First they said they were going to try and get it spooled back up at noon today. Then they were thinking about tomorrow morning. Well, now we're told it's probably not going to be until Friday morning. There are a few flights that will fly. They're allowing airlines to reposition some planes, and they're going to allow airlines to pick up a few passengers that are stranded to get them on to their original destinations. But not in any grand scale. There are thousands of people stranded all over the countryside. There was one just anecdote of a little town up in Newfoundland, Canada, where there are 1,200 Americans in this little town sleeping there 6 to a room for the second night in a row. And there are thousands of passengers stranded around cities in this country as well. Now, the reason for the holdup in resuming the full-scale flights is not that the airports aren't ready, getting these new security measures ready, and not that the airlines aren't ready in being ready to move their planes around, but it's the FBI and the CIA, we're told, who've put a hold on resuming things full scale. They just want to be absolutely sure that the threat is over, that it's completely safe before they do this in any big way.
Does that also apply to general aviation, that is, private planes?
That applies to general aviation as well. And now when they do get going, you know, we've heard a lot, there's going to be a lot of different changes in security. Some of the interesting ones, you can pick out so many, but there's going to be enhanced screening, more use of these backup tests where after you go through the screening, then they single you out to put an explosive sniffer over your bag. They're going to search every aircraft before it takes off. There's going to be a temporary ban on passenger flights carrying mail or cargo, so that's a big inconvenience to the post office. And this is almost a duh, but they're not going to allow knives. For the first time, there's an outright prohibition on taking knives through passenger screening.
And Bob, what about emergency cases? People who have to go to a distant hospital to have some critical work done, or if there's a dying relative of some kind, are there going to be any emergency exceptions to all of this?
Yes, I'm sure that there's going to be a humanitarian policy overriding on this. The first day there were a couple of flights that got caught at things like that. Organ transplants, there was an organ transplant turned around and they couldn't do the operation that day as they planned. That was first day confusion. But I think now there's going to be a lighter hand over all this, and there'll be more exceptions for that kind of humanitarian case.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Robert Hager, who's been on duty practically around the clock, working the FAA beat for us, obviously. Well, that, too, will interrupt America's commerce, to say nothing of America's culture and business. But this country is responding so magnificently in terms of its patience. We can only hope that that patience will be extended in the appropriate fashion for another 24 to 48 hours. The work of hundreds of medical personnel in this city has met the difference between life and death for victims who were caught in these attacks. And Dateline's Stone Phillips now has some of the exceptional stories from a hospital that was once in the shadow of what was once the World Trade Center. Stone?
Tom, last night, Dateline producers using handheld cameras were granted a rare opportunity to take you inside the intensive care unit at a hospital very close to Ground Zero, the New York University Downtown Medical Center. What you're about to see and hear, medical personnel on the front lines giving you, in their own words, a real sense of what it's been like to face this tragedy.
It's just a very sobering experience for all of us. There were severe burns, fractures, dislocations, degloving injuries where parts of people's extremities and their torsos were literally pulled apart. The sort of things that you see in war.
Most of them were jumping from the building.
And you said that you saw two fire trucks pull up, and firefighters went into the World Trade Center, into the towers, and then
they went down.
And they went down.
Whoever these poor souls are, they didn't make it out.
My name's Dr. Howard Beaton. I'm Chief of Surgery and Emergency Services at NYU Downtown Hospital. Many of the people who were here in 1993 couldn't believe the devastation at that time. 93 was really just almost a dress rehearsal compared to the seriousness of this.
How many times have you been up and down these stairs today?
More than I can count. When 7 World Trade Center went down an hour or two ago, we lost power. We're on our emergency generators now. I'm told that we can stay on our emergency generators for 36 hours. And all essential services can run here, including the operating room.
All of this right now, the monitoring, the respirator, everything is running on emergency power without any interruption.
As a matter of fact, the GE emergency generating truck, I saw it pull up to the hospital with backup generators in case there's a problem with our backup generators. We have double backup on the generators.
Right.
I've been running, bringing bodies back, bringing them to the triage unit. We didn't bring anybody back alive.
How are you holding up, doctor?
Well, considering about as well as could be expected. It's pretty horrific out there, obviously. Unfortunately, from my standpoint, people come in, a lot of them are not salvageable.
We are staffed to run how many operating rooms right now?
We're staffed to run 3 operating rooms until midnight.
What have you seen today?
Seen the most horrible way a man can treat man.
What I thought I'd like to do is to check up on the status of the patients who are in our intensive care unit now.
This is one of our first patients we saw in the emergency room. He's a 50-year-old white male. He was actually an insurance broker. He was just in his office and was actually on the 78th floor of the second tower and was evacuating the tower and experienced all these explosions and made his way back down. Came in with penetrating abdominal wound and also open shoulder separation, dislocation. And he's actually miraculously doing very well.
Airports throughout the country will be closed at least through noon.
This is in every way comparable to a war zone and to a battlefield.
When we saw the first explosion go off, we saw about 30 bodies just come out of the sky and just thuds all over the place.
The true first responders are the ones that paid for it with their lives.
There's a lot of dead emergency workers today.
Apparently a firefighter found in the rubble.
Many of them responded to the Trade Center when the first plane hit and were buried in the rubble. Unlike most people, EMS workers tend to rush towards the scene of an accident, and unfortunately many of them have been trapped and are injured.
This patient is a 79-year-old man who had an obvious fractures of the facial bones, basically disconnecting the facial bones with the rest of the craniofacial skeleton. If they can't breathe, they can't live. So we did that immediately on him via the direct incision in his windpipe.
This is the place, though, where life hangs in the balance.
That's correct. This is a unit where patients, after they're cared for, stabilized, are brought in here for further management.
Well, we have to bring a mask. Yeah. Bring your mask.
It's funny because we said, well, if they happen to hit the World Trade Center again, what would we do? And we'd be able to call for more help. We'd be able to call, and we did get that. We got help from other hospitals.
You just said that during your most recent training.
Right.
Yeah. What if they hit the World Trade Center again?
Yes. We went to the windows and we looked down and we said, okay, this is no longer a game. This is reality. I saw the smoke. I saw my truck out there covered with soot. I saw people running here with blood on their heads. This is no longer a game. This is not a TV show I'm watching, a movie. This is reality. This is what we do.
Breathe. Back up, all right? Keep on breathing.
Unfortunately, it's not really all that nice all the time. So we'd like to talk a little bit right now about this patient behind the curtain, if we could.
Please.
This is an unfortunate 29-year-old gentleman who suffered severe injuries, was brought into the emergency room. He worked at one of the Wall Street firms, and despite our best efforts, we weren't able to stop the bleeding. We brought in the orthopedic surgeons to try and fix his pelvic fracture. But once again, despite all that and infusing massive amounts of blood products, we weren't able to save his life. We've heard about the successes, and you saw the people running away from the building and a lot of the news stories, and obviously those are the people who have survived. And only after we begin the process of actually being able to enter the towers, or what remains of the towers, and bringing these other people out, then this story will be much more common.
The hardest case, single case, I've been in practice for 20 years. The hardest case that we put so much into trying to save his life.
Can I bring someone in to see the body?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
As physicians, as healthcare professionals, we're taught to fight this battle a single patient at a time.
If there's anybody who's a paramedic, a nurse, a doctor, and can make their way to Pace University, we need anyone that can come and give a hand so it can free up the doctors.
One of the young ladies who's
saw the building coming down above her, jumped out of the window onto some rubble below, and I think she was about 9 stories high. In a normal day, we would say might need amputations or a year and a half of reconstruction, and it's really a tragedy, but really she's alive, so it's a win, and it's a triumph of the human spirit to escape such a disaster like that.
I'm very excited about being able to save this guy. I have heard that he was a guard of the observation deck. He came with extremely serious, life-threatening, fatal injuries into the hospital. We were lucky that we recognized the problem immediately and were able to treat it effectively. So the fact that the patient's actually going to live, he has a great chance of doing well. Situation like this, when you have a guy that you can get back to his family and get him back, that's makes it all worth it, and that makes the years of sacrifice seem worthwhile.
We've been told by EMS to expect as many as 500 more casualties as they start to go through the rubble. We just don't know when that's going to start.
So in many ways, the worst might be still to come.
The worst is we just don't know when the worst will be. Anybody who wants to stay in the hospital, to stay nearby, or has to stay in the hospital because they can't, can stay here. You're going to make sure that you have an adequate number of rested staff. These are human beings who care about other human beings, and because of them, other people are alive. And I think that this is a wonderful story.
A deserted, dusty ghost town. A rubble-littered dreamscape, more Armageddon than Gotham. CBS newsman Sean Efron, with a home video camera, discovered this shattered New York last night from the back seat of a police car. It is a place inhabited by firefighters, rescue workers, medics, where men in gas masks direct the only traffic there is: ambulances, fire trucks, and emergency vans. Floodlit desolation, seen through a